Hi there, everyone. My name is Gary Reamer, and I am a shareholder with the law firm Maddin Hauser, and this is Franchise Bites, where once a month we try to look at a different topic to either help existing franchisors refocus or new franchisors kind of get up to speed on what they should be doing in building a successful brand in the marketplace. So today we are going to cover the topic of brand consistency, training, and support. Let me share my screen here with everybody. All right, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit today about brand consistency, training, and support. All right, and why does this really matter? I think it goes back to a story with Ray Kroc, probably one of the most famous franchise systems everybody knows about at the end of the day is McDonald's. And what Ray Kroc wanted is to make sure that you had the same experience wherever you were. And he originally discovered that he had a problem. If you ate a French fry in California and you ate another French fry in New York, they didn't taste the same initially. Why? It wasn't the same potato. Maybe it wasn't the same oil. So he decided immediately that he wanted that experience to be consistent for everybody involved in the system. So he had to find new sources of potatoes and make sure he could ship them across the country so that, again, the experience was identical for everyone that was sitting down at a McDonald's. So that's kind of the root of this. If you want a level of consistency, especially we have quite a few new franchise systems on today. And what we're looking to do with you right now is tell you it is important to have that consistency. So, for example, you set up your first franchisee up for business. You want that location to have the identical signage, the same chairs, the same type of experience. I've had some franchisors tell me it's close enough. It's really not close enough. You are trying to build a brand in a system. I had a new franchisor client call me up one day. They brought in their first franchisee and they said, "You were right." And it's like, what was I right about? Was my question. We took the attitude that, they picked out a sign, it was good enough. Well, it turns out their sign was round instead of oval. It didn't quite look the same as their two corporate locations. And they realized that initially they didn't think these things were a big deal, but they really were a big deal at the end of the day. People do care about these things, and you are trying to not only establish a brand system, but you're also looking to sell your product being a franchise to future buyers. And they want to know what they're buying has a track record and a feeling to it. The hope is whether they came into your corporate location or a franchisee's location, they had a wonderful experience and want to duplicate that and thought that this was a really wonderful idea at the end of the day. So we have our cute little dog. We want the same pampered experience when anybody comes in. But you say, kind of, why does that matter here? Well, because brand dilution and customer dissatisfaction, as well as inconsistent operations, become the kiss of death for the system. Remember, if I am a customer and I go into a franchisee in Idaho and have a bad experience, that reflects on the entire system as a whole. Why? Because that might be my only experience with it. If there's another one that pops up down the street from me or where I live, I'm less likely to frequent that location. Where the reverse can be true. If you had a high quality product where you loved it, you were thrilled with the service, you love the cleanliness, you're more likely to frequent that location. And let's face it, times are different now. There's Yelp reviews, there are reviews online from various different sources. And one of the things a lot of times that people look at are what are the reviews of your particular business. You might be putting out a top-notch product, but are your franchisees doing the same thing? So it's mission critical to make sure that it matters to you and to them, and they understand that. You know, franchisors really do face the unique public relations challenge because their business is potentially dispersed across the country. A lot of large franchisors eventually develop an entire team to handle the PR just related to what might happen with respect to a bad review, a bad posting, a bad story that's out there to help protect the brand. So remember that. You know, the basic things that we're talking about is why is it important? Number one, the brand consistency. One, it helps you sell. One, it helps you attract, new franchisees and build a strong system and a strong reputation. And I haven't talked to one franchisor that was not passionate about what they were doing. They've made the shift from being a business owner to a franchisor. And that's a huge step. As I often tell new franchisors, you've just taken on a second job or a second career because it's completely different. Having said that, and mentioning earlier, we have a lot of new franchisors on with us today. I do want to shift to what you really need to do here, though, in light of these things. And I apologize in advance because this is going to potentially put more work on your plate at the end of the day. And it's having to do with the training here. What are your solutions to these things? And I want to spend some time discussing those, to help make sure, one, you have brand consistency, and two, there's nobody out there diluting the value of the brand that you care so much about. So let's talk about this a little bit. Last month, we talked a little bit about franchisee selection, and that's obviously an important piece to the whole thing. Somebody who's not just looking to make some money, somebody who's willing to follow your instructions, or at least says they are initially, is kind of the initial step. Then the next piece, whenever you have a new franchisee, that's kind of step one, is a strong training program. Remember, you're teaching them to follow your system. Hopefully you have a strong manual that helps them with that. So when it comes to developing a strong training system, whether it's for the new franchisee that's coming in the system or continued training, you want to constantly evaluate that. So when you start to have somebody go through the basic training, and you're following them and seeing how they're operating their location, is there a deficiency? Is there something that you should have been teaching them that you didn't, that somehow slipped through the cracks? The other thing I suggest for the newer franchisors is possibly having one of your existing employees go through the training program. It sounds a little bit strange. They know the system, and you have to pay them to go through it because they're on your dime, wage and hour rules. But it may be worth it if you have a good employee who's thoughtful, if they're going through the process and they can point out, what about this? I know you need to do that, but you didn't discuss this during our training program. So it's worth the time, at least initially, to potentially have an existing employee go through your training program. Again, you want to tweak this. And again, the reason why is brand consistency, and you don't want to dilute the brand with a second rate performance, especially because a franchisee wasn't told what to do. Another thing that eventually you can develop, and when I call it e-learning platforms, I'll change that a little. It could be simply a monthly or weekly or bi-weekly Zoom call, team calls, or whatever else, who is the primary operator of any franchise location to review if there have been any complaints, any thoughts, any problems, to start to discuss those things. Did they have a situation that arose that they weren't trained on, and maybe that you never thought about? There's two components to this. One, giving them the assistance that they need to overcome this issue. And number two, turn that around and put that as part of your ongoing training program. The other reason why this is critical is because it shows your level of care of the process to every franchisee in the system. Initially, when you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 franchisees, you can all interact and it's relatively easy. As your system grows, you have 100, 200. It may just be kind of submitting questions in advance, but going through different topics each month with the franchisees to make sure they're up to speed, or simply giving them a reminder that, by the way, we had one location that had a complaint that the restrooms weren't cleared. Make sure that you're responsible for cleaning the restrooms before you close and every 2 hours once you open, or whatever your criteria is under your manual. We all sometimes need a refresher course. With the e-learning platform also, you might be able to give them ongoing training as refresher courses of some of the key aspects of the business that they're supposed to be following. The other thing recently I had one franchise do or like incorporate was a checklist system. It sounds kind of silly to have a traditional clipboard and a list of things to do every day, but it makes a lot of sense. There's a strange book out there called the Checklist Manifesto that is actually a book all about checklists. And it talks a lot about how hospitals have incorporated those and have reduced the level of patient infections and things like that, verifying that certain steps are taken, including something as simple as washing hands. So I also think that that's a great method for your franchisees if you want to be ensure that they're doing a certain basic level of task on a daily basis. Then there's field support. Part of having a webinar is some level of field support because you might not be able to get to every franchisee's location. But if you potentially have a team, that might be wonderful to kind of go in there and see how they're doing everything. I don't want to raise this to a level of a secret shopper. It's simply you have a right to go in there and see how things are operating and look at everything. The other way you could do it is simply send a family member in there that's at the level of a secret shopper to kind of see, is everybody courteous? Is everybody wearing the proper attire that they're supposed to be involved with? Have them make a call and inquire about somebody coming out to their home for a free estimate and see how they're treated, how the process goes. The other part of field support is if there's a complaint. So we haven't talked much about this, but hopefully your franchisees have an obligation to tell you if there's anything going wrong. But it's also quite possible you're going to see it because you're monitoring social media. And you've set it up that if there's ever a comment related to your franchise system, you get a ping and you could look at it. So if there is a negative comment that arose, quite often there's nothing you can immediately do. In other words, the customer's come and gone. But you can reach out to your franchisee and say, hey, we had this negative comment. Let's make sure it never happens again. Do you know who it is? Can we reach out to that person and do better by them? Remember, this is your brand. Just because you had a franchisee make a mistake, and I'll use the term loosely, made a mistake. Sometimes there's certain customers that are hard to satisfy no matter what you do. Just take the negative comment as kind of a learning process. If you can fix it with the customer, great. If you can't, what can you do to make sure that that doesn't happen again? Next piece we'll talk about is regular audits. Again, an audit, most people kind of think it is more financial, looking at, what the numbers are. But it could be more than that. One, you could look at the numbers and see, was there a consistent drop in sales by your franchisee over a period of time, and try to figure out what caused that. There are a couple different things. It could just simply be the economy and where they're located. But it also can be, is there a problem with customer service out there? Are there negative reviews that are circulating? Have they had extreme turnover in their employees, and now these new employees aren't properly being trained? That can be something that can be discussed, because everybody wants to make more money. If the franchisee's sales are going down, they're making less money, and you're making less money on royalties. And kind of the last piece that kind of dovetails into what we started with, constantly updating, is your detailed operations manual. As I always call it, and you'll hear me say it time and time again, it's the Bible. Every time you discover something new or want somebody to do something different, update the manual and notify your franchisees about this particular change. It's crucial for you at the end of the day to make sure that things are being updated in your operations manual is key. I'm going to stop sharing our slideshow and talk about a couple other things kind of related to this, because I like to share different ideas that I've seen. Number one, I talked about, having a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly Zoom call with your franchisees. Something else is, you might even want to give them a title saying that they're your consulting team, and sit down with them. And hopefully, if you have the ability to meet with somebody in person, and let me go back to the situation of what I'm talking about, having a consulting team, an advisory committee, or something else similar to that. What I'm looking for you to do is, if you can, is actually bring these people together, break bread with them, and have an opportunity to sit down and find out what they're thinking, what they're seeing, and what they're feeling about the system. This is a time for the franchisor to put their ego aside. Whether you have it one or not, it's sometimes easy for people to become defensive when they're hearing negatives. I've always listed this with anybody I've worked with, especially younger attorneys, is if I give you criticism in some way, it's because I believe and know you can do it better. So I ask you, if somebody's got criticism of your system that you love so much, hopefully they're telling you out of a place that they want this to be better, and think about it. Maybe you can't accomplish everything they want, but they've identified an issue. So what are you going to be able to do? So that's it for today. I try to keep everything short and sweet, depending on what part of the country you're calling from, whether this is lunchtime on the East Coast or, you're just getting into work at 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Thank you very much. Until next month, please let me know if you do have any questions or topics that you'd like covered in future sessions. And that's it for now. So thank you very much.